Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to do a no palette left behind update. I did end up completing my goal on one more palette this month, and there are still a few that I just have made absolutely no progress on. So we're gonna go through them. I have my counter app here on my phone with all of the different palettes and how many times I've used them, and we're just going to go through all of the ones that I have completed, all of the ones that I have decluttered, and a few of the ones that I am currently working on. I don't have these palettes to show right now because I am in Australia. It is also 8:45 at night, so I'm sorry if the lighting isn't super great. I have this massive under the skin pimple right here that hurts really badly, and my skin has just been so dry since I've been here. So excuse my appearance. I hope you guys are having a great day. If you're new here, hi, my name is Vivian. I'm a robotics engineer with a love for all things beauty and makeup related, and I have been trying to focus a lot on using the products that I have in my collection up via project panning, via no palette left behind challenges, via shop my stashes. I do have maybe a little bit larger of a collection than I think is absolutely necessary. So I have been trying to work my way through those products, and this is just a way for me to cycle through my eyeshadow palettes and try to use them. There are definitely a few here that have been very unloved in my collection, and it's kind of my goal to use them a little bit more. If you are interested in this type of content, be sure to like and subscribe if you aren't already, and let's just hop into it. Let's do a little recap of all of the ones that I have finished so far. If you're unfamiliar with my variation of this challenge, my goal is basically to use all of my eyeshadow palettes 5 times. I do have quite a few. I think I'm at 16 or 17, somewhere around that range right now. And I just don't find myself wearing eyeshadow that often. And so I think the amount that I have is a little bit excessive for my style of makeup, how much I use makeup. I also tend to wear very neutral eyeshadow looks when I do wear eyeshadow. So just the fact that I have so many palettes is a bit just unnecessary. So we're gonna go through all of these. I have finished 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 eyeshadow palette usage goals so far. So the first one is Charlotte Tilbury Super Nudes, Beauty Bay Pastels, my M Cosmetics Divine Skies eyeshadow in the Rodin color palette, I believe. I finished using the ColourPop Going Coconuts palette. I used up my Urban Decay Naked Wild West palette, and for the one that I finished within this past couple months is the Nabla Side by Side palette, which is one of my favorite eyeshadow palettes. That's the palette that I brought with me to Australia. So that is 6 palettes in my collection that I've hit my goal on, which I'm pretty impressed with. There is one palette in my collection that I have used 4 times, and that is the Alicia Olive Browns eyeshadow palette. I haven't been super focused on this one because I feel like I will be able to use that super quickly, pretty much at any time. I don't really need to force myself to use it. Most of the palettes left in this just update are either super colorful palettes or relatively new palettes, or just palettes that don't excite me as much. I have used a couple of my palettes 3 times in the last year. The first one is the Nabla Miami Lights palette. It is an all glitter palette, and I feel like 3 sounds about right for the amount of usages that I've had with it. It is a very chunky glitter. I feel like it has to be a specific vibe for me to want to reach for that palette. One of those vibes was for the Taylor Swift Eras Tour, which I went both nights, and I used that palette both nights. I feel like Christmas would also be a good time to use that palette. So that's 3 times. I do think I can reach 5 times by the end of the year. That one I'm not super worried about There are a couple in here that I am worried about though. So let's talk about the next palette that I've used 3 times, which is the Beauty Bay Utopia palette. This is very similar to the Beauty Bay Pastels palette, but it's just a little bit more vibrant. I feel like this was a very summer palette, and I don't think I missed my opportunity to finish it up, but I do think that I would have used it a lot more in the summer than I would have now, especially because it's getting into fall. I'm leaning more towards warmer tones instead of bright colorful tones. So I'm a little hesitant to say that I'm gonna finish using this up 5 times by the end of the year. I don't realistically think that's gonna happen, but I am gonna keep trying. I want to try to finish it up. The next palette is the e.l.f. Bite Size Quad in Cream and Sugar. I've also used this 3 times. I definitely think I can reach 5 usages of this palette by the end of the year. Again, it's just your everyday basic neutrals palette. There's 4 shades in it, and one of them is like a lid setting shade. 2 of the middle shades are like shimmers, and then the last shade is a deep brown that I use as a winged eyeliner usually. I definitely think that I am going to be able to finish that by the end of the year. I'm not super worried about that. There are quite a few palettes in here that I've only used 2 times. The first one is a new palette to my collection. It's the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude palette. This came out, I want to say, about a month ago, and I actually got this sent to me through Skeepers. I didn't purchase this palette. I haven't purchased a palette in a very long time, but I did get sent it. It is currently one of my favorite nude eyeshadow palettes. I feel like it's perfectly cool tone for me, where it's not really cool tone, it's more neutrals than anything, but with like just a tad bit more cool. And the shimmers in that palette are absolutely stunning. I have loved both of the looks that I created with that palette. It is very much just a basic neutrals palette, but the shimmers are insane, absolutely insane on that palette. Another palette that I've only used twice is the Makeup Revolution and Soph Super Spice palette. To be completely honest, I don't think I'm gonna reach 5 uses on that palette, purely because that is such an auxiliary palette for me. I don't know, I only tend to reach for that palette when I am looking for a specific primary color. Otherwise, I just don't see that palette as like an everyday palette. I honestly think that Soph created that palette as an auxiliary palette to her first 2 Makeup Revolution eyeshadow palette collabs. So I don't think I'll reach 5 uses. I don't see any sort of event that I would need to reach for a specific primary color. I really don't think I'm gonna reach 5 uses, but I am going to try a little bit harder. The last palette that I have 2 uses on is the Natasha Denona Biba palette. Honestly, this has just kind of taken a backseat to the I Need a Nude palette. I prefer the tones in the I Need a Nude palette. I prefer the shimmers in the I Need a Nude palette. And I think if I were to lose my entire collection and were to purchase a Natasha Denona palette, I would definitely choose the I Need a Nude palette over Biba. Just price-wise, the impact of the shimmers themselves, I just very much prefer I Need a Nude. That being said, I do still think I can hit 5 uses on that palette. It is still a warmer neutrals palette, and since it is getting closer to fall, I do think that I will get some use out of that in the next couple months before the end of the year. The next 2 palettes I have only used 1 time, which is kind of sad, honestly, and I've talked about this before. I talked about this in my eyeshadow palette collection video where I went through and swatched all of my palettes. I can link that in the eye for you if you are interested. The 2 palettes that I've only had 1 use on so far are my Pat McGrath palettes. I have the Pat McGrath Celestial Odyssey palette and the Pat McGrath Utopian Dreams palette. Again, I think I touched on this a little bit in my eyeshadow palette collection video, but for me, those 2 palettes are just very much like event palettes in my head, especially the Utopian Dreams palette, those shimmers are just so impactful that I feel like I have to want a super bold eyeshadow look, and that's just not something that I tend to wear. They're just so expensive. Utopian Dreams was more expensive than Celestial Odyssey, but I just feel like those palettes are my special occasion palettes, which I don't think they should be, right? Because I have them, I don't want them to just sit there and go to waste, but I just can't seem to force myself to use them just on the everyday. I think I need to find inspo for Celestial Odyssey specifically because, as I said in my other video, that the color story just doesn't make a ton of sense to me. It's a little bit scattered in my head, and I just feel like I need to find inspo to use it. I know Celestial Odyssey was a limited edition palette, so you can't get it anymore. I just, I do wish I used those a couple more times than I have. I still have a couple months. The only downside that I am thinking about is that I am basically losing an entire month. So as you guys know, I am in Australia right now. I've been here for about a week and a half, but I still have 3.5 weeks outside of the US. So basically, I'm gonna be gone for most of October. I won't be back until the very last week of October. And you know, that's a long time of not being able to use these palettes and not being able to get usage out of them. I am hoping that by the time late October, November, December rolls around, I'll have found some inspo for these palettes, but honestly right now it's not looking too hot. And then the last palette that I have right now is my Nabla Cutie Midnights palette. I do have that in Australia with me. That is the second palette I picked up for my Shop My Stash rotation for September and October. I have still only used this palette one time, and I just feel like it's a little bit difficult. A lot of the men that I work with, I know, are just gonna comment about it and just say dumb stuff to me, and I don't really want to deal with that, so I haven't been wearing a ton of makeup. So yeah, I think I just need to force myself to use it. I do still have a couple weeks here before I go back though, so I'm hoping in the next couple weeks I'll work up the courage to use it. It's just a little bit more difficult because there's not a lot of variety there. It is very much a blue palette, and I also just have to be very much into wearing blue eyeshadow, which I am not always. I feel like it has to be a very specific mood for me to use it. So those are all the palettes that are still in my collection. I did end up doing 2 declutters in my eyeshadow palette collection video where I swatched everything, and those 2 palettes are the Maybelline Nudes of New York palette, which I did use 2 times before I decluttered it. It is a neutrals palette, but it was definitely my least used neutrals palette, and it just didn't bring me joy. The shadows were very powdery. I was really only holding on to it because it was my first palette that I ever bought, and it was slightly nostalgic to me. Honestly, I just didn't use it, and I feel like it definitely could have gone to a better home. So I did end up decluttering that. I also end up decluttering the Makeup Revolution and Friends collab palette that I have. I only kept it because of the packaging, the outer packaging itself, which is the door frame, like the very classic Friends door frame, picture frame type thing. And I like Friends. I'm very much a Friends galley. I'm quite literally rewatching it right now. I just started it last week from the beginning because, you know, it's very much like my fall show. Gilmore Girls is also one of my fall shows, but Friends has always been up there for me. I love Friends. It is just so nostalgic to me. The eyeshadow palette itself was not getting used. I was quite literally only keeping it for the outer packaging. The color story of the palette itself was just not my vibe, and I don't want to hold on to things just because I'm not missing it whatsoever. And I feel like if I ever do want to watch Friends or want to be nostalgic, there are other ways for me to do that than to have an eyeshadow palette that I'm just not using. That brings my total palette count down to 17 palettes, and out of those 17, I have I have completed my usage goal on 6 of them. I'm really close to another 4, but there's definitely still a long ways to go. I have roughly about 2 months to use them all, which I think is doable if I commit to wearing eyeshadow more often. I'm hopeful, but I make absolutely no promises. There are a couple off the top of my head where I just don't think I really don't think that I'm gonna meet my goal. I am still gonna try. I'm gonna force myself to try and use up more of these. That is everything. Those are all of my eyeshadow palettes. Those are the amount of times I have used them all. And I have high hopes that I will be able to finish my usage goal on more than half of my palettes. I'm already pretty close. I'm already about like a third of the way there. So I think I can do the rest. I have faith in myself that I can do the rest. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I don't really think this was a super exciting update, but you know, it's getting down to the end of it. I am definitely just at a huge disadvantage for being on this work trip and being out of the country for over a month. I feel like I am definitely missing out on some of these usages of some of my more colorful eyeshadow palettes. But I still have 2 months to go when I get back and have access to my full collection again. So hopefully this time in December, you guys will be able to see much more progress on some of these. That's it. I hope you guys are having a great day. If you guys like this video, be sure to like and subscribe if you aren't already, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye guys.